appreciate everybody being here tonight. Thank you for making this a part of your day and a part of your week. For everybody online, thank you for joining us as well. We hope that everyone is doing well tonight. Let's go ahead and open up with a word of prayer, and then I'll make one announcement, and then we'll get into our Bible study tonight. Father, thank you for this evening, the time set aside in the middle of the week to gather together to study a portion of the Gospel of Mark from Jesus' life, to see these encounters and these conversations take place, that we can learn to model Him in our own life, that we would speak like Him, that we would act like Him, that we would treat others the way that Jesus did, that we would love them, treat them with grace and mercy, with the intention of planting seeds to where we can share the gospel and to be a good influence in their life, a godly influence. So we're thankful for a time that's been set aside for that, but we're also thankful that we can gather together and encourage each other and just build one another up in the middle of this week. And we pray that we will make the most of that opportunity. In Jesus' name, amen. So one announcement, just something I know everybody's aware of. With this upcoming Sunday, that will be the last class that we'll have, the last Bible class that we'll have in recording in regards to decisions and choices, the current study. Jeff and Kevin Snyder are going to start the first Sunday in February with a recorded study of the life of Elijah. And they're going to take us through the life of Elijah for 7 weeks, I believe is what it is. So just to make you aware of that's coming down. So we'll have one more Sunday with the current class, and then the first Sunday in February, Lord willing, then that'll change over to the life of Elijah. So just to make you aware of that, you'll see emails and other announcements concerning it too. So we are at the end of Mark chapter 7. We're not going to spend a lot of time with a lot of these. I left you with 2 questions last week, and the idea was just simply so that they could kind of be warm-up questions for us today. I know that we've had a long day with work, with school, with other things going on. So just kind of stir us up a little bit, get our minds thinking. But we're at the end of Mark 7. Jesus is coming back from Tyre and Sidon, where he was with the Syrophoenician woman, a woman that he treated in such a way that her faith came out, and that faith even amazed Jesus. So I'd encourage you to go back and look at it. So again, we're not going to spend a lot of time with this section. I really want to get to something in chapter 8, but just 2 questions that I had from this at the end of Mark chapter 7. In verses 31 and 32, Jesus returns to the Decapolis. Remember, the Decapolis was this Gentile area, is around 10 villages. I'd say cities or towns, but that would probably be too generous. They're villages. So not a lot of people around, but the Decapolis was 10. They were very close together, clustered together. But Jesus returns, and this whole crowd of people just swamp him. They just come over. And just kind of, again, as a warm-up question, how did the people in the Decapolis know to come to Jesus when he came into town? When he's going from village to village, as he returns to the Decapolis, how do these people know to come to him, and knowing that he would help them? And that he would serve them, and that he would do good for them. How do they even know that? Go ahead.
There before, and the demon-possessed man, they sent him away, and he was on his way back to the boat, and the demon-possessed man approached him, and Jesus said, "Go and tell your people," what exactly did he say? "Go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he had mercy on you."
Okay.
So they knew that, what Jesus could do. They were amazed by what he could do.
Okay, absolutely. Reading from Mark 5 and verse 20, I believe, is what that was. This is a fruition. This is what happens when we actually do what Jesus says. Here's this one guy outside of the disciples that's given permission to go and tell others, and he actually does it, and look what happens. This success happens. So the 2 things that I put down on my study Bible at home was reference C, Mark 5:20, because Jesus gives him that directive that Gary, that you just read for us. But the other thing that I put down was see Romans 10. How will they hear unless someone goes and teaches or preaches? And Paul goes through that whole litany of things. I'm planting these seeds because, again, at the end of the gospel, we're going to get permission. We're now a reader, and we're going to turn into a participant. Will we do what others in the gospel have done? When Jesus gave permission, they talked. They talked. They went to their family. They went to friends. Mark 16, what we call the Great Commission, Jesus will give us permission. Go. Go into the world. Go everywhere that you can. Will we go and will we talk? These are things to keep kind of in the back of our mind as we're making decisions and choices on that. In that same vein, among all the people that are coming, there is a deaf man that is brought to Jesus for him to heal. And it's a fascinating story, and we're just not giving it the justice that it is due. But there's something interesting about this healing story that Jesus hasn't done with all the others. And that is that Jesus sees this man, and he takes him to a private setting. So you got all this crowd, everybody's there, we've got a friend, he can't hear, we want you to heal him. All right, I can do that. But instead of doing it out in the open, like he's done with previous people, men and women, he actually takes this deaf man into a private setting. Why is that? It's one of those things that if you're reading it, that doesn't seem to match the pattern. Why would he take a deaf man into a private setting to heal him and open up his ears? Yes, ma'am.
It may have made that man more comfortable. May have fit his personality better.
Yes. Know this just simply maybe from our own experiences, even if they're few. Those who have special needs, those who have disabilities, there's going to be a shyness anyway. There's going to be an embarrassment that comes with it. So it's not necessarily that Jesus is doing anything profound as much as he is going to do what he can to make this individual hopefully as comfortable as he possibly can. And to me, that just spoke volumes of how tender and compassionate Jesus is. We think tenderness and compassion is in the idea of him healing the deaf man, and that's true. But it's also making the environment conducive to where this man's comfortability, I like that word a lot, this man's comfortability is going to be conducive to it. And think about the people that we want to help. And sometimes we forget they're human beings. They're not projects to be fixed. But people who have feelings and emotions, who have that awkwardness because of this disability or other things, we need to take that into account as much as anything else. Yes, ma'am.
This may be an off-the-wall comment, thought, but it just occurred to me that maybe Jesus was the first voice that man heard that he is.
Okay, that's a good point too. He is in the crowd. We don't know how big the crowd is, but you're right. If this is going to be opening his ears for the very first time, and of course that's going to be tied in with his speech, because he has speech issues as well, which makes sense with deaf and auditory learning in that regard. Maybe he does want Jesus' voice. Jesus wants his voice to be the first one heard.
That the noise of the crowd would confuse him.
That's a good point. It confuse him, and if he's never heard before, it would overwhelm him in that regard. So there's a lot of things at play in this miracle, that it's not just the miracle, it's what Jesus does on the surrounding parts. When we help people, and we, by the way, are supposed to do that, we do what Jesus does, we do with the available resources, we got to remember that these are human beings, that they are men, women. Again, they're not projects, they're people. They have feelings, they have emotions. They have dignity, and sometimes we've got to go an extra mile, a second mile, to ensure that dignity is preserved in that. So there's a lot of layers to this that you could go a little bit further on that. So just some warm-up questions for you. Getting into chapter 8, again, we're kind of moving fairly fast. The first 10 verses deal with the feeding of the 4,000. Not going to spend time on that, but I'm going to give you one lesson from this. And this is discipleship lesson number 18. Remember, we're learning to be disciples. Kind of taking the Gospel of Mark from 2 points of view. We're learning to be disciples. Disciples must grow. because situations will repeat themselves. We got to grow. Well, most of us all of us here have lived long enough to know that situations do repeat themselves, don't they? Maybe different people, maybe at a different place, but we've been in situations before where we've had deja vu. Oh, I've been here before. This sounds familiar. This seems familiar. The 4,000 is just 1,000 different than the 5,000, right? That's the only difference in the number. What will they learn? Will they take the lesson that they are supposed to learn from the 5,000 and apply that this is part of our growth? Will we learn from the previous so that we can apply that? This is a huge component because we're about to get into the teaching of Jesus on the boat for the third time. And that's where that's going to come in. I know I'm kind of moving pretty fast, but anybody got any questions or comments or observations? All right, look at 11 and 12 and 13 real quick. Just take a glance at it. Or if you want to read it real quick, that's fine as well. Tell me two lessons we learned from this. Pharisees come, they demand a sign. They argue with Jesus. Give us something. Give us a reason why we should believe in you. Tell us something. Show us something. What are two lessons we learned from this very, very brief passage?
Heart, just keep denying.
Okay, so the hardness of heart is still there, right? Because if you're the reader and you assume that the religious leaders are part of the crowd, you're kind of thinking, he just opened the ears of a deaf man. He just loosened the tongue so that he could speak. He's healed a leper. He's done some other miraculous things. What's there left to do? So for me, one of the lessons was for some people, I think we've kind of come across people like this before. There are just some people, it doesn't matter what you say, and it doesn't matter what you do, it's never going to be enough. And it's not going to be enough because of a hard heart, like you said, Ms. Doris. To me, that was one of those lessons. What's another lesson?
They had not been there and seen it.
Okay. Perhaps not. Can anybody think of anything else? Jeff?
Well, I'm thinking about as humans, sometimes we desire certain things, but they're not of God. They're not godly things. So
Okay.
they
All right.
kind of pursue.
Okay, I didn't think about it that way, but that's a good way to approach it. That sometimes we would want something that's just not of God. Or God has already done it. There's just no need for Him to repeat the same thing. But that's a good way to approach it. Anne-Marie and I were talking about this earlier this week. This is one of those human moments of Jesus. What's His reaction to their argument and their request and demand for a sign? He says no.
And he's saddened.
Seems like he's saddened. And what expression does he? He sighs, right? And we haven't done that today at all, right? It's even this lesson that even Jesus, I see just kind of this mixture of emotions. He's saddened. He's probably frustrated. It's this, we're going to do this again. I've got a lot on my plate, and you're taking time away from me just to argue about the same thing. They come to argue, come to demand. And the way that he handles it is that he sighs. And he really doesn't give them much of an answer. I know he tells them to a certain extent, I'm not going to go any further. But he just kind of, to me, he just sighs and, how long do I got to do this? And then he just kind of, looks like he walks off, doesn't he? You got to know when to sigh and to walk off. It's kind of that. Go ahead, Bob, and then Justin.
It's a message to them, a message to us, that there is a time when we will not get anymore. They had the signs, we got a whole book full.
Okay.
And so if we're going to be looking for something more, another sign, we're going to be waiting a long time, because the next one is going to be when He returns.
Okay, that's a good point. There's nothing else left to come except for His return, and then that's it. Everything does end. Justin, go ahead.
You mentioned the time. and that Jesus is being everlasting, has been dealing with this since creation, right? People, and then Jewish people, and Israelites, and all this whole time. So it's not just like his short ministry. He's like seeing this same thing replicated again and again. These are the people who should have been alongside John the Baptist announcing him. The signs have been laid out with the prophets and all. The people who should know the most, they weren't recognizing him. I'm sure it was frustrating.
And you had to think, and it's kind of like, even if I gave you one more, would you even believe? Go ahead, Chris.
I have never, ever interpreted this as exasperation.
Okay.
It says he sighed deeply in his spirit, and I had always interpreted that as just sadness.
Okay.
Literal, true sadness, because, and this is right after he's healed the deaf and the mute.
Mm-hmm.
He's fed the 4,000. He's fulfilling prophecy right out of Isaiah. These are, the signposts are set. And so ultimately he has to conclude, he's not saying no sign shall be given, because signs were given.
Sure.
No sign that will satisfy.
Mm-hmm.
And he knows these are lost. And I always interpreted it as sadness based on what's the text.
And that's probably the predominant emotion that he has, because I like how you put it, there's no sign that satisfies. It's and if you couple with what Justin says, that he's been doing this since literally the beginning with everybody, what is there left to give? And as the reader, you're wondering, and then you get to the end, and what's left to give is his own life. And then for some, that won't be enough. There comes, and even from a practical side, there comes a time where you realize that there are some people who just want to argue with you, and you just got to leave. Out of profound sadness, more than frustration or anger. This isn't going anywhere. Maybe I got to deal with this or tackle this another day, but right now, I don't have to. And sometimes we got to learn from a practical point of view. This is just simply to argue, and I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to do this. We've been doing this for a long time. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to move on. Doesn't mean that I'm going to completely give up, because he's still going to talk to him. But from a practical point of view, to me, that's one of the most powerful lessons. Here they come with the only intention of arguing. And by the way, we've met people who we know they just want to pick a fight with us. Got to know when to do. Alan, Alan?
Well, it also was not, it's almost like maybe some of the maybe frustration, maybe some of it was the fact that this was not how the sign was going to come from. God had a plan for it.
Yeah.
His sign was coming from the resurrection. That's how we know that he was who he was, because he was raised from the dead. Mm-hmm. There was no sign he needed to get there, because it wasn't time. There's several times where he said, it's not time yet. It's not time yet. It's not time yet. It wasn't time yet.
That's a good point, too. I didn't think about it that way, but you're right, especially in John's gospel. Yeah, the hour hasn't come yet. It's just not. So that's a great point. And the resurrection is the ultimate sign of them all. So that's a good point as well. So there's a lot of material, even in 3 verses, that you could really just go with and see how Jesus handled all of these things from a prophecy standpoint, to an eternal standpoint, to a practical standpoint. 3 verses. How does Jesus deal with somebody who wants to just argue and pick a fight? He sighs, he lets it out, and then he moves forward. Doesn't mean that he's not going to come back. Doesn't mean that he's not going to double back or circle back and deal with it. But it just means that at this moment, I'm not going to deal with it. Because it's just not time. Not time. So just something for your consideration. Yes, ma'am.
It occurred to me, I can't help but think of the difference, and I know it's because of the timing and Jesus' mission, but the difference in when the Israelites were in the desert, and the various and sundry ways when the people kept saying, show us that you are God. And in various ways he struck them dead.
Yes. The Israelites doing that numerous times. And we're not much different, where we still kind of beg and ask for the same thing. So let's get into verse 14, because this is where I really wanted to spend some time. So I've already told you, at least in the Gospel of Mark, there are 3 times where Jesus uses the boat as a teaching tool, as his teaching place. Does it when he falls asleep, comes the storm. We saw that he did this earlier when he passed by and walking on water. And this is the 3rd time, but this is the culmination. This is kind of a mini climax for us. Do we get it? Do we see? Do we hear? Do we understand? Or are we just kind of floating out there? So I want to actually take the time and read this. So read along with me. I'm reading from the English Standard Version, Mark chapter 8, beginning with verse 14. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only 1 loaf with them in the boat. Who is the they? Disciples. So, all right, so we got the 12. They forgot to bring bread. They had only 1 loaf, probably a little miniature loaf, not enough for 12. And he cautioned them, verse 15, and he cautioned them, saying, watch out. Be aware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? Do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? They said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000. How many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, do you not yet understand? This is one of my favorite because I'm one of the 12 on the boat. So let's dig into this. What are the disciples concerned about? In verses 14 and 16, what are they concerned about? Food. And why would is this a legitimate concern? Somebody said sure. All right, so sure, yes. And why is it legitimate? I know it's easy. These are softball questions, but just trying to get us talking a little bit. Why is that a legitimate concern? All right, it's a basic need. And given kind of the pattern of how things are, it's probably safe to assume they haven't eaten today on this day, or they've eaten very, very little, just because there's so many people and so much demands on their time. So it's a basic need. And that day, probably typical of other days, they've had very, very little time to probably eat. We know some of those days. We know what that's like. So they're concerned about this. They're bothered by it. To make matters worse, they keep saying that there's no bread, but in actuality, how much bread is there? Is there really no bread? It's 1 loaf, right? Now, it's little, and you have 12 grown men that are hungry. Little might as well be nothing, but I've always thought it was ironic that 1 loaf turns into the conversation, it turns into no food. How does 1 loaf equal no food? But then we do that all the time with things, right? I don't have anything. I'm not talking about just food, just in general, right? We do that all the time. 1 loaf somehow equals no food. But I think that has more to do with the hunger and everything that's there. So in verse 15, and this is just Jesus, because you got to think, he already knows this. Okay, he's going to deal with it. But he doesn't. What does Jesus try to teach them in verse 15? And you can probably look at some of the questions you can read over if you need to for easy answers on this.
Not become like Herod and the Pharisees.
All right, so be careful not to become like the Pharisees and Herod. And the word that he uses is leaven. Be aware of their leaven. The English Standard Version, watch out. Be on your guard. Look out. Don't miss it. It'll sneak up on you. What is the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod? Okay, we got doubt. And what do you mean by doubt? Doubt in him? Doubt in what?
Doubt in Jesus' mission.
Okay.
And not understanding what the Old Testament has told us about how the Messiah would present.
Okay. All right. So maybe you got doubt in Jesus, doubt in the mission, doubt in what you mentioned the Old Testament. Is that? Okay. Okay. So, all right. The doubt, not understanding. Okay.
Hypocrisy.
Hypocrisy. Okay, that's a huge one. That's a huge one, and I don't doubt that that's for sure here, Jeff.
Sarah Hairston online says legalism or the traditions of men.
All right, so legalism, traditions of men. That's a great observation and answer, Sarah. Thank you. What else? There's something specific, and consider the context. Consider what we've kind of looked over. What was the demand of the Pharisees and the religious leaders? We just looked at it. What was the demand? Give us a sign. Give us a sign. Do one more. One more. Prove yourself one more time. We're not sure if you can do that or not. Give it one more. Come on, you can do it one more time. We're just asking for one more time. So that, to me, that's the leaven of the Pharisees in the immediate context. Now, here's where it kind of expands, because that's what leaven does. So we're kind of using this image of expansion. It's an expansion of their hypocrisy, because there's plenty of signs to show that he's proven to a certain extent who he is. With that ultimate, what Alan talked about with the resurrection. You've got him teaching several times where there should have been enough of their background to put two and two together from the Old Testament in terms of prophecies and understanding. So be aware of missing what is right in front of you. You're missing it. You're so consumed with something that you don't think you have that you're missing what is right in front of you. Hold that thought, because Jesus is going to come back to it. What's the leaven of Herod? Go back to Herod. Go back to John the Baptist. Go back to all of that. What's the leaven of King Herod? Okay, protecting his position. Fear. That's a powerful one. Why does he even kill John to begin with? Why is he nervous when he hears about this Jesus? So that's a powerful thing, because what's driving the concern of the disciples and their focus on the bread? What are they afraid of? Hunger. But go deeper. What's the fear driving the fear of the hunger? It's not just the fear of hunger itself, but there's something deeper in that. Death. The fear of lack. We're not going to make it. We're going to miss this. You know, we're not going to be able to encounter this. We're not going to be able to overcome this. There's 12 of us and one little bitty loaf, so it might as well be that we don't have any food. It's not just the fear of hunger in of itself, but it's the fear of, what are we going to do? How are 12 of us going to eat and be full and satisfied with one little bitty loaf? So it's not just the fear of hunger itself, but it's the fear of, what are we going to do? When we ask that question, and we've asked that numerous times in our own life, what am I going to do? What are we going to do? That's fear language. And notice what happens. In verse 14, they're concerned about the bread. Verse 15, Jesus is trying to teach. And in verse 16, they began discussing with one another the fact they had no bread. Did they hear Jesus at all? Did they hear anything that he said in verse 15? Is there any indication whatsoever in verses 14 or 16 that they heard Jesus? What does fear and what does the leaven of fear and the leaven of missing what is right in front of you do to Jesus in our life? It blocks him out. It blocks him out because this is the genius part of Jesus being the master teacher. What does leaven do when you add it to something? I heard somebody, it spreads. When something spreads, it takes up space, right? But it's also pushing something else out of the way. Fear is pushing Jesus and his word out of the way. Fear is pushing Jesus and all the things that he has done in the presence of the disciples for these 8 chapters out of the way. Fear is driving all of this, and it's making them miss what is right in front of them. And it's not a what, but a who. Because the answer to their concern should have been what? What should have been in the forefront of their mind, and this is why Jesus just rattles off question after question after question. What should have they known by this time on the boat? They don't have to know it all, but there's at least one thing that they should have known by this time being on the boat. That Jesus is in control and can do anything. Why are we wasting our time being concerned about bread? What can He do with a little loaf? Literally, what could He do with a little loaf? He could feed 5,000 with just a little loaf if He wanted to, because He's already done it. He could feed 4,000 with a little loaf because He's already done it. The whole idea of the lesson is did you learn what He's done? And did you take that with you on the boat? Did you take that with you on the journey? This is why He asked, I was curious, I've never done this before. In verses 17 through 21, Jesus in rapid fire asked 8 questions, back to back to back to back. I never noticed that in terms of just asking rapid fire questions. Just look at it. Jesus, aware of this, why are you discussing? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes to see and ears to hear, do you not do that? Do you not remember, number 5, when I broke the 5 loaves, how many leftovers did I have? When I broke the others, how many left? These questions. And He finally ends with verse 21, do you not yet understand it? And that's how the story ends. Why is Jesus being so tough on the 12? These are some pretty terse questions. Why is He being tough on them? Maybe tough's not the right word, but why is He just forcing the issue?
They're with Him the whole time, seeing everything He does.
Yeah.
And even the people, when you think about it, the people who don't really understand Jesus, they knew to go ask Him for something.
Yes.
And here they are just thinking about the bread. And who knows, maybe He perceives their thoughts, or maybe they're actually talking about it out loud. I mean, the thing is, like, the frustration thing, when I taught students, I'd be frustrated and sad because they're not using their talents, or they're not paying attention. They can be so much better if they just apply themselves. And that can be both frustrating and sad, and I think that's what Jesus experienced.
No, I agree with you so much too, because it's like you said, they've been with Him from day one, as far as we're concerned. Day one, they've seen everything. There is nothing He has hidden from them. And here's the Syrophoenician woman that we saw last week, who has a crumb. They got a loaf. She's got a crumb, or she wants a crumb. At this point, whose faith is the size of a mustard seed? Theirs or hers? Hers. You know why? Because I don't need another sign. I know what you can do. I don't need you to give me one more sign. I know you can do it. You want to know what a mustard seed is? Mustard seed is the woman who says, I'm good with a crumb. It's not the 12 who say, we got a loaf, but we can't do much with it. It's an interesting dichotomy. Go ahead, Bob.
He's about to turn the ministry over to them.
Okay.
And they're going to have to teach people to believe. And you don't believe yourself, it's going to be really hard to do.
That is a great... He's got to force it more than anything. Alan mentioned the hour's not coming, but it's quickly coming. Literal time is not on Jesus' side, and He's got a lot of ground to cover. If the boat is revealing that you're not where I thought you should be, we got to catch up quick. I'm sure you did that in terms of being a teacher. Yes, ma'am.
That's basically what I was going to say.
Okay. Jeff.
Sarah again online, and she's coming from her perspective as a baker.
Okay.
And so to her, the leaven is a reference to useless swelling, useless instead of true growth. And, you know, like you were talking about the mustard seed, she's thinking about the imagery in Scripture of positive faith. It's things like seeds, trees, buildings, things that make real progress.
Okay, hey, that's great. I'm glad. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that with us. All of these things, I see myself in the boat because I'm so concerned about all these other things that are legitimate. But then how much I like, again, what Sarah said, that useless space-taking type thing. How much time did I waste about the things that I know are legitimate, but I should have known that Jesus can take care of? What is happening in my heart and my mind that is taking up so much space that I can't see or hear or understand what He wants me to hear and see and understand? Yes, ma'am.
About with this passage is when you're talking about yeast, it's a catalyst in the process of the recipe or what have you. And if you're focusing on the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod, that's a catalyst to kind of get a reactionary thing going. And I think we get spun up, just cycling into, we find ourselves being a catalyst with our thoughts and our behaviors, and we miss, like what you were saying, we miss the whole point that He is able. And so that's what I see as the reactionary yeast.
Yes, and that's a good way. And then it just grows, and it grows and it overwhelms. Yes, that's what I was about to say. Better or worse, which is almost, Jesus is kind of telling them, you're teetering on a line, which is kind of the warning. Watch out. You're teetering on the line. And so how do we combat this? There are two things in terms of this. One is verse 17. I don't know if you underline in your Bible or if you highlight or what you do. But 3 words. Aware of this. Is Jesus surprised that they only have 1 loaf? Is Jesus caught off guard that they are concerned about something to eat? Is Jesus, I've used this a couple of times, is Jesus, you know what? I'm glad you're thinking about that because I didn't think about that. You know what? Let's talk about it. I wonder what I need to be reminded of that Jesus is aware of in my own life. It may catch me by surprise. It may catch me off guard. It may even, better or worse, dominate my heart, my mind, my thoughts, my words, my actions, my day, my relationship. But it doesn't Him because He's aware of it. And if I take this and I apply this to the teaching in Matthew 6 with the preface of the disciples' prayer, your Father knows what you need. Somebody finish it. Before you even ask Him. Prayer is not an informational thing. I need to inform God of something. He's already aware of it. What I need for Him to do, and this is the second thing, is, I like how you put it, Angie, He's able. This is what the story's about. You need to know I'm able. I'm able to do this, and I'm able to do far more than this, because that's the story. When I fed everybody for 5,000, how many baskets did I take up? He focuses on the leftovers. So it's not just that I'm able, but I am more than able. Do you understand this? Because if you do, when you're standing before Sanhedrin, when you are standing before a temple, when you are standing before forces that are greater than hunger, you know that not only am I able, but I am more than able. Because this will not be the last time that you face something that concerns you. I'm aware of it, and I am more than able to handle it. And this is the question, and this is why he ends on it. Do you understand this? Do I understand this? Not here. do I understand this? You do. You're in a good spot. Now, very quickly, how patient is Jesus through all of this? Does he chide them? Does he rebuke them? Does he call them out and embarrass them in front of each other? What does he do? You're probably a little frustrated, but this is still another teaching opportunity. We got to be careful, not just with ourselves, but others, and exhibit the same patience that he exhibits. Not everybody gets it. Not everybody understands. Even when I think they should understand. And that's okay. I heard a great definition of patience the other day on a podcast, that patience is the intentional mindset, the deliberate mindset of going at someone else's pace. That's a really good definition of patience. The deliberate mindset of going at someone else's pace. I'm impatient because you're not working on my timetable. Jesus moves within the timetable of the disciples, still with the cross as a shadow. So any questions, comments, observations before we move on? Anything anybody want to add or take away? Yes, ma'am.
I do find it interesting that it never says whether or not he fed them physically.
Silent makes you wonder. Even if it is, there are some things that are even greater needs than hunger. Yes, ma'am.
And we combat our fears by reading Scripture and seeing what he did in the past and knowing that he's in control. But it's also really beneficial to keep a prayer journal and to be able to look back on your own life and see where prayers are answered and where God has worked in your life, so that when you do have those times of fear, because you know they're going to come, that you can look back on that and say, it's not just old history. It's my life that he's taking care of me.
It's recent and present history. It's history in the making. That's a great point. Not just having Scripture there, but having a journal, a prayer journal, or other things where you can write down and go back and remember what's there, and it helps revitalize. Okay.
That family history, spiritual history, that God is working in our lives.
That's true. That's a great point, that it's something to teach now and for teaching later, too. So those are great points. Very quickly, I just want you to read over in this next week, this healing of the blind man in Bethsaida, starting in verse 22. And it's called the double touch miracle. And I'd like for you to just read it. And I'd like for you to just write down a few thoughts on your own on what it means. It's the only miracle. It's not found in Matthew or Luke or John. It's only found here in Mark. And it's the only miracle that required Jesus to do the same thing twice. Up to this point, he's either been able to speak and it happens. He's been able to touch and it happens. Somebody's been able to touch the hem of his garment and they're healed. But this is the only time that Jesus has to not do it once, but twice. It's the double touch miracle. I'd like for you to just read it over, talk it over with your spouse, someone else that you study with. What's the meaning of this? What are some lessons, some meanings on that? So the bell is rung for all of our parents. Just if you'll go out, Lee is out there in the exit tower. The kids will be coming down the steps. I appreciate all of you being here, and the class is yours.